I never thought the most painful blow of my life wouldn't come from sickness or death, but from the mouth of my own daughter. I was sitting in the back of the elegant ballroom, surrounded by gold balloons and cheerful music, when I watched her step onto the stage, radiant in her deep blue gown, to give her thank you speech. It was her 35th birthday, and I, naive as I was, expected to hear at least one word of gratitude, just one. But what spilled from her lips was a dagger that pierced me without warning. She hugged her mother-in-law, Mrs. Charlotte Sterling, tightly, pulled her up from her seat, and with the microphone in her hand, she declared, "This is the only mother who truly matters to me." The entire room erupted in applause. I saw the smiles, the camera flashes, the bright eyes of the guests, and then, as if that weren't enough, she turned toward me. She added, in that firm voice she had so often used to scream at me in private, "You can go now!" I felt the air rush out of my lungs. My hands trembled on my purse as I desperately tried to hold on to what little dignity I had left. No one looked at me. No one defended me. It was as if I had suddenly been erased from history. I rose slowly, my knees heavy, as my daughter, Naomi Dubois, watched me with that mixture of contempt and triumph I had seen in her eyes so many times before. But just as I took the first step toward the exit, someone else stood up. My daughter-in-law, Lena Hayes. Lena walked with a determined stride toward the stage, took the microphone from Naomi's hands, and with a voice that was shaky yet resolute, she said something that chilled the blood of everyone present. "I can't stay quiet," she began. "Today is your birthday, and yes, you deserve to celebrate. But you also deserve to hear the truth." The silence that followed was so dense that even the background music seemed afraid to continue. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, marked by that discomfort that only appears when they sense something sacred is about to break. Naomi, confused, tried to reclaim the microphone, but Lena held it with both hands as if her life depended on it. "You have always looked down on me," Lena continued. "You've made me feel less than. You've treated me like I wasn't worthy to stand by your side. But you know what? The real mother here isn't the one who applauds your vanity, or the one who smiles for the cameras. The real mother is the one who was with you since you were born, the one who took care of you, the one who sacrificed her life for you, and that woman is standing there while you throw her out of your party as if she were trash." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the room. Paralyzed, I could barely believe what I was hearing. My daughter-in-law, whom I had always viewed as distant, as a stranger to my struggles, was the only one who dared to say out loud what no one else wanted to acknowledge. Naomi paled. She tried to laugh, to pretend this was a misunderstanding. "What are you saying?" she stammered. "This isn't the time for your dramatics." But the damage was already done. The attention was no longer on her. It was on me. For the first time in years, people looked at me directly, as if remembering that I existed, that I was more than just a shadow in my daughter's life. I don't know how long that silence lasted. For me, it was an eternity. I only heard my heart beating loudly, desperately, pounding in my temples. And then I understood. That public humiliation, which I had believed to be my end, was actually the beginning. I left the ballroom that night with my face held high and my eyes dry. There were no tears that could wash away the wound, but there was a resolution beginning to form within me. Something had ignited in my gut. I couldn't keep letting my daughter, the child for whom I had given my life, destroy me over and over again. The cold night air hit my face as I crossed the threshold. I hugged myself and remembered every sacrifice. The sleepless nights caring for her when she was sick, the times I gave up my own dreams to support hers, the years of silence so as not to embarrass her in front of anyone. All of that was reduced to a gesture, to words of contempt spoken into a microphone. As I walked toward my house, I knew nothing would ever be the same. My daughter had sealed our fate with those words, but my daughter-in-law, with her unexpected confession, had opened a crack in that family's perfect facade. A crack I intended to widen until everything collapsed, because if she had the courage to speak, I would have the courage to act. That night, alone in front of the mirror, I repeated the words I hadn't dared to say in the ballroom. I am not going away. I am not giving up. And that is how it all began. People often believe that the love between a mother and daughter is indestructible, like a bond that neither time nor circumstance can break. I believed it too. Perhaps that is why the pain I feel now is so unbearable, because I gave my whole self to a lie that slowly crumbled away. When I think of my daughter's early years, my memory is tinted with tenderness. I remember her as a newborn, with those big dark eyes looking up at me as if I were her entire world. I spent hours holding her in my arms, singing improvised lullabies while exhaustion burned in my back. I didn't care. In every smile, in every first babble, I found a reason to keep breathing. I hadn't had a happy childhood. I grew up in a house where the absence of love was the daily bread. My sickly mother could barely manage me, and my father, with his violent temper, took out his frustration on us. I swore it would be different with my daughter. I swore I would give her everything I didn't have, a safe home, a warm hug, a refuge where she could grow without fear. At first I succeeded, but over time, the roots of that promise began to crack. Her father, my husband Marcus, was never an easy man. He was a hard worker, yes, but also proud and distant. He paid almost no attention to the everyday details that I valued so much. For him, raising a daughter was a secondary task, a duty that fell entirely to me. He became the judge and executioner of my efforts. If she cried, it was my fault. If she got sick, I hadn't taken good care of her. If she acted out, it was because I had been too soft. And my little girl absorbed every word. She grew up hearing from her father that I wasn't enough, that I lacked character, that I wasn't up to his standards. At first, she defended me, but over the years, she stopped. It was easier to join him than to stay on my side. I remember one afternoon when she was just 12 years old, I had cooked her favorite meal to cheer her up after a tough school test. When I served her plate, she looked at me with disdain and said, "Dad says you're a bad cook." I froze, the knife still in my hand. I asked her if she thought so too, and her response was a shrug, as if my effort meant nothing. That day, I understood that the poison of contempt had already taken root in her heart. The teenage years were even crueler. Every time we argued, she repeated phrases that weren't her own. They were echoes of her father, and later, of her husband's family. "You're outdated. You're in the way. You never gave me what I needed." And I, instead of confronting her, remained silent. I was afraid of losing her. I believed that if I endured, if I held on, someday she would understand everything I did for her. But that day never came. The arrival of her mother-in-law, Charlotte Sterling, completed the sealing of my fate in Naomi's life. That woman, sharp and with a gift for charming people, won her over with attentions and flattery that I never knew how to give so ostentatiously. She had money, connections, and sweet words that sounded like music to ears anxious for recognition. Naomi started comparing me to her, seeing in that woman what I couldn't offer, and each comparison left me further relegated, smaller, more invisible. Slowly, I began to notice that family invitations were shrinking, that the photos she shared on social media never included me, and that in conversations I was merely a footnote, an uncomfortable memory she preferred to hide. When did I lose my daughter? That is the question that keeps me awake at night. Maybe it was the day I accepted silence instead of demanding respect. Maybe it was when I chose to be quiet rather than confront her father. Or perhaps it was even before that, when the pain of my own childhood prevented me from teaching her how to love me. The truth is that while she grew, I faded, and by the time I wanted to react, it was too late. She had replaced me. She had found in another woman the maternal figure I always dreamed of being for her. And yet, here I am. Despite everything, I still feel love. A wounded, mutilated, but still living love. because even though she pointed me out in public, even though she threw me out of her party, even though she told me to leave, I am still her mother. And a mother's heart doesn't obey logic, but an instinct that condemns her to love, even those who hurt her. That is my greatest weakness, and, at the same time, my greatest strength, because that love doesn't mean resignation. On the contrary, it means I won't surrender. Even if my daughter denies me, I have a right to the truth, and if she chose to forget it, I will make sure to remind her of it, even if it hurts her. What happened on her birthday wasn't an accident. It was the fruit of years of silences and contempt. But it was also the start of something new, because now I know I am not willing to keep living in the shadows. If my daughter wants to bury me alive, she will have to watch me rise from that grave and give her back every word, every gesture, every piece of disrespect. And I won't do it with screaming or violence. I will do it with the truth, that truth they fear, that no one expects, and that will be my greatest revenge. If I had to describe my life in one word, that word would be silence, because what destroyed my relationship with my daughter wasn't just the yelling, the arguments, or the contempt. It was the prolonged silences, loaded with an invisible poison that accumulated day after day until it suffocated me. At home, my husband, Marcus, owned the conversation, and I learned too quickly that contradicting him was useless. He imposed his version of life, and we, both my daughter and I, had to accept it. The terrible thing is that over the years, Naomi didn't just accept it. She admired it. He became her model of authority, her point of reference. I, on the other hand, was relegated to the role of a secondary figure, a muted backdrop. I remember one particular dinner. Naomi must have been 16. The three of us were at the table, and she excitedly commented that she wanted to study music. She had talent. Since she was little, she showed a sweet voice and an excellent ear. I encouraged her. I told her she should follow her dreams, but her father laughed scornfully. "Music," he said, with that voice that chilled the air. "Music doesn't put food on the table. That's for mediocrities. You will study law, like your cousin." I tried to intervene. "Let her choose. Don't force her." He fixed his gaze on me, and before I could say anything else, my daughter interrupted me. "Dad is right. You don't understand." And the silence fell upon me, heavy as a brick wall. That was just one example among many. Every time I tried to offer support, my voice was buried beneath the echo of his. She grew up convinced that my words were worthless. She learned that her father held the absolute truth, and that I was merely a murmur, background noise that could be ignored. But eventually, that role was taken by someone else, her mother-in-law. When Naomi met the man who would become her husband, Elias Sterling, I thought life would take a new course, maybe an opportunity to find a love that would soften her. However, what I found was another long shadow that displaced me even further. Elias's mother, Charlotte, presented herself as a confident, elegant, charming woman. From the first moment, my daughter was captivated by her. I remember Charlotte's first visit to our house. She arrived with a bouquet of imported flowers and sweet words that sounded fake to me from the start. Even so, Naomi hugged her enthusiastically, and as soon as Charlotte left, commented, "Did you see how amazing she is? She understands me like no one else." I smiled, though something inside me was tearing apart. That, like no one else, was a cruel reminder that I had never managed to occupy the place she needed. The silences became even more painful after that day. Naomi started spending more time with her mother-in-law than with me. She consulted Charlotte first about any important decision. When she had problems, she ran to seek her advice. I stayed on the sidelines, waiting in vain for her to include me, to let me be a part of things. But all I received were cold silences, glances that passed right over me, and short phrases that shut down the conversation. The humiliations came later, almost without my noticing. Comments made in a loud voice in front of other people. "My mother-in-law always has the right words. You wouldn't understand, Mom. She knows how to plan a party, not like you. I feel more like her daughter than yours." Each phrase was a knife, and I swallowed it in silence. I didn't want to confront her. I didn't want to push her further away. I believed that if I endured, if I stayed close, she would open her eyes someday. But time showed me I was wrong. Silence became a habit. I would visit her, and she would barely speak to me. I would accompany her to events, and she would relegate me to a corner. In family photos, I was the figure cropped at the edges. I didn't even realize that she was gradually erasing me until it became obvious that I was a stranger in my own life. The worst part was that I started to believe her. There came a point when I myself thought I didn't deserve to be there, that perhaps it was true I hadn't been enough, that my mistakes had weighed more than my successes. I sank into a quiet sadness, into a bitter acceptance that my place had been taken and that no one, not even my daughter, would fight to give it back to me. But what happened on her birthday changed something inside me. When she told me in front of everyone that I could go, the silence finally shattered. It was as if the evidence of what I had tolerated for years had hit me head on. And then my daughter-in-law, Lena, appeared, unexpected, with a voice that defied that custom of silence. She spoke when I had forgotten how to. In that instant, I understood something crucial. My silences had been my prison. I had locked myself in them, believing that staying quiet was the way to keep my daughter. But staying quiet only stripped me of my dignity. Now I knew that if I wanted to recover what was left of me, I had to speak. Even if no one wanted to listen, even if it hurt, I had to do it. The weight of the silences had crushed me for decades, but now, finally, I was ready to break them. And I would do it with the truth, even if that truth set fire to everything my daughter had built. I will never forget the expression on Naomi's face when my daughter-in-law snatched the microphone that night. She, accustomed to being the center of everything, to no one contradicting her, was paralyzed. For a second, I thought Lena would limit herself to making a trivial comment, maybe a forced compliment, but what came out of her mouth was a torrent of truths no one expected, and every word was a whip that echoed against the ballroom walls. "Today is your birthday," Lena said, her voice trembling but firm. "And it's fair that you receive affection, but it's also fair that you face what you have wanted to hide for so long." The murmuring among the guests stopped. Glasses froze halfway to mouths, laughter caught in throats. I felt my heart accelerate as if it wanted to escape my chest. Something big was about to happen. And for the first time, I wasn't the target of the humiliation, but a witness to a truth that was dragging me from the shadow into the light. Naomi tried to regain control. She approached Lena with a strained smile. "What are you saying? Don't make a drama out of my party." But Lena didn't stop. I saw her grip the microphone with both hands as if holding a weapon. "Your mother gave you everything she had," she continued. "And you, instead of thanking her, have made her the target of your contempt. You've allowed others to humiliate her, and you joined in the mockery as if it were a sport. Do you know what it's like to see a mother leave your house crying because you treated her like a stranger? I do, because I've seen her." A murmur of surprise swept through the room. My throat constricted. I could barely breathe. I hadn't expected such a defense. I had never imagined that anyone, especially my daughter-in-law, would have the courage to expose in front of everyone what I had suffered in silence. Naomi, nervous, looked at the guests. "Don't listen to her," she said, laughing forcedly. "She always exaggerates." But Lena took a step forward and lowered her voice as if speaking directly to her. "It's not exaggeration. It is the truth you've hidden beneath your parties and your applause." The tension became unbearable. I could see Naomi's mother-in-law, Charlotte, stiff in her chair, her lips tight and her gaze furious. She couldn't bear her kingdom of perfection to be shaken, and Naomi, seeing herself exposed, began to lose control. "Shut up!" she yelled at Lena. "This isn't your moment!" Lena looked at her calmly, and it was that calm that made Naomi tremble even more. "No, this isn't my moment," she replied. "It is your mother's, the one you snatched away years ago." The words hung in the air like a verdict. I felt my legs tremble, but not from weakness, from a strength I hadn't remembered feeling in a long time. It was as if Lena's voice had returned the dignity I myself had buried. The guests didn't know where to look. Some watched me with pity, others with embarrassment, still others with a mix of surprise and respect. No one dared to applaud this time. It was too real, too raw. Naomi, in contrast, was falling apart. I saw her face shift from rage to humiliation, from arrogance to desperation. She wasn't prepared for someone to confront her, much less in front of everyone. She had always lived believing she could manage appearances, that with a false smile, she could hide the rot she carried within. But that night, the masks broke. I wanted to speak. I wanted to seize that moment to say what I had kept bottled up for years, but I held back. It wasn't my turn yet. Sometimes the greatest act of power is silence well used. Lena had lit the fuse, and I had to wait for the exact moment for the explosion to become my weapon. Naomi tried to recompose herself and, in a desperate attempt, hugged her mother-in-law in front of everyone. "She is the mother I always wanted," she said, almost screaming. "I don't need anything else." But the phrase sounded hollow, empty. No one believed it because, after what Lena had revealed, everyone knew it was nothing more than a childish defense, a last, desperate thrashing before sinking. I watched her in silence, with a mixture of pain and compassion. On one hand, she was still my daughter, the child I once carried and soothed during nights of fever. But on the other, I no longer recognized her. She was a woman consumed by her own pride, unable to see beyond her ego. That night, I knew the war between us had stopped being invisible. Now it was public. And in a public war, the winner isn't the one who screams loudest, but the one who knows how to wait and strike at the right time. Lena looked at me from the stage, and in her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before: complicity. It was as if she were telling me without words that I wasn't alone, that someone was willing to testify to what I had lived through. And then I understood that this birthday, which had begun as my condemnation, had turned into my opportunity, because Lena's words weren't the end of the humiliation. They were the beginning of my retribution. That night, after the birthday party, I returned home with an exhausted body and a wounded heart, but also with a mind ablaze. Lena's words had opened a crack in the facade Naomi had constructed for years, and as I took off my dress and let down my hair in front of the mirror, memories started falling over me like stones. Scenes from a past whose wounds never closed, episodes that had scarred me invisibly. I close my eyes and see her as a little girl, barely 5 years old, running toward me with a bunch of wildflowers she had picked in the yard. "You're the best mommy in the world," she told me then with a smile that lit up my soul. That memory haunts me because it proves there was a time when I meant everything to her, and it hurts to ask myself when I stopped being that. As the years passed, the sweet gestures faded. I remember her adolescence as an especially cruel phase. There were days when she came home from school, threw her backpack on the couch, and walked right past me without greeting me, without looking at me. I tried to reach out, asking her how her day was, or if she needed anything. She answered in monosyllables, or with that silence that hurt more than any insult. One day, when she was 15, we argued because she had arrived home late. I was worried. I had waited up for her with dinner served. When she came in, I asked her to explain where she had been. She looked at me with a mix of annoyance and contempt and said, "You are nobody to question me." That sentence split me in two. It wasn't just adolescent rebellion. It was a conscious rejection, a direct cut to my role as a mother. That night, I cried in silence, with the table still set and the food cold on the plates. Another episode was branded on my skin like a burn. It was at her high school graduation. I worked so hard to prepare everything: her dress, the dinner, the details I thought would make her happy. And at the end of the event, when the organizers asked students to go on stage with their parents, she first sought out her father. I went up too, but when I tried to take her hand, she discreetly pulled it away. No one noticed, except me, and that tiny gesture broke my heart. It was as if she wanted to erase me even from the photos that would immortalize her in that important moment. The following years were a collection of small and large wounds. I remember going to her house after she had already moved in with Elias. I brought a dessert I had prepared with love, thinking it would please her. As soon as she opened the door, she looked at me up and down and said, "Oh, Mom, don't you get tired of trying to play the good one? Nobody here needs your stuff." And she snatched the platter from my hands without looking me in the eye. I stood in the hallway with a frozen smile while I listened to her tell Charlotte in the kitchen, "Look how she insists on trying to be relevant." I remember that phrase as if it were yesterday. Each wound built a wall between us. I tried to tear it down with patience, with love, with resigned silences. But my daughter raised new stones with every slight. It reached a point where I understood that she didn't want reconciliation, that her choice was clear. She had decided to give another woman the place that belonged to me, and the worst part was that she did it with a cruelty that seemed to seek my total surrender. In those lonely nights, I wondered if I had failed as a mother, if perhaps I hadn't given her enough, or if I had been too overprotective. Guilt devoured me. I thought that my own past, my broken childhood, had marked the way I raised her. Maybe, without realizing it, I had suffocated her with my fears, and she found in Charlotte the free and confident figure I could never be. But then I recalled everything I sacrificed, the years of working, the sleepless nights, the dreams I shelved so she could pursue hers, and I understood that, no, it hadn't been a lack of love or dedication. The problem was that in her ambition for recognition, she chose to deny her roots. I was the inconvenient part of her story, the one she preferred to hide to shine in front of others. Those open wounds never closed, and on her birthday, they all bled at the same time. When she told me in front of everyone that I could go, it wasn't just a humiliation. It was the cruel summary of years of accumulated contempt. But the difference now was that I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore, because those wounds, even though they hurt, had also made me strong. Every hidden tear, every swallowed insult, every avoided glance had forged me like iron. And if my daughter thought she could still break me, she was wrong. Now I was the one willing to break the silence, to raise my voice, to use the truth as a weapon. That night I promised myself there would be no more tears in vain. The wounds would still be there, yes, but they wouldn't be signs of defeat. They would be my battle scars, and with them I would march toward the battlefield that awaited me, the battle for the truth that had yet to be revealed. Pain teaches, but humiliation sharpens. And after that party, when I heard my daughter tell me publicly that I could leave, I understood that the time had come to transform my scars into weapons. I couldn't keep expecting gratitude where there was only contempt. I had been silent for too long. I had endured snubs that left me branded like hot iron. But that night, with Lena's words echoing in my mind, I decided I would no longer be a victim. A plan began to germinate in silence. It wasn't the first time I had thought about defending myself, but I always lacked the courage. This time, however, anger was my engine. I was no longer seeking reconciliation or tenderness. I was seeking justice. The first thing I did was open the drawers of my memory, the ones I had kept closed for fear of what I might find. I remembered that my husband Marcus, before he died, had left a trail of economic secrets, dubious investments, and documents he always concealed with suspicion. For years I preferred not to look, not to ask, telling myself it was men's business. But now I understood that in those papers could be my most powerful weapon. I started visiting the home office that had been abandoned. The smell of dust and old paper accompanied me as I sifted through yellowed folders, sealed envelopes, and contracts I had never dared to read. At first I felt lost, like an intruder in my own home, but patiently, I deciphered every line, every number, every signature. I discovered that my husband had made deals with my daughter's in-laws, financial favors that linked our destinies more than I ever would have wanted. And there was the irony. The mother-in-law my daughter now venerated actually owed me more than she would ever admit. This was dynamite, and I knew it as soon as I read it. I didn't want to rush. I sought help quietly. I contacted a trusted old friend, Mr. Arthur Bell, a retired attorney who had always respected me. I brought him the documents and asked him to explain what they truly meant. I remember him looking at me with wide eyes. "Do you have any idea what you're holding here?" he asked me. "With this, you could sink your daughter, her husband, and even the in-laws' whole family." A shiver ran down my spine, not because I was scared, but because, for the first time, I understood that I held the power in my hands. I began to formulate my strategy. I kept copies of everything, securing them in different locations. I even gave a sealed envelope to my lawyer with clear instructions in case anything happened to me. It wasn't paranoia, it was prudence. I knew Naomi's arrogance and Charlotte's cunning too well. If they discovered what I knew, they wouldn't hesitate to attack me with everything they had. In public, meanwhile, I continued to play the role of the frail, almost invisible mother. I attended family gatherings. I smiled when I had to. I lowered my head to avoid raising suspicion. No one imagined that behind that facade, every gesture, every word, every glance was being calculated. The key to everything was patience. I knew Naomi would make mistakes. Her arrogance made her careless, and her need to prove she didn't need me would lead her onto dangerous ground. I just had to wait for the right moment to reveal what I had in my hands. At night, as I reviewed my plan again and again, I found myself thinking about the past. How had we gotten here? How had the little girl who hugged me to sleep turned into a woman capable of casting me out of her life as if I were a nuisance? Sometimes the pain almost made me falter, but then I remembered every slight, every look of superiority, and my resolve turned to steel. I also thought a lot about Lena. Her bravery at the birthday party had been the spark that lit the fuse of my plan. I wondered what motivated her to speak up, if she did it for me, or because she, too, had suffered at the hands of my daughter. I didn't know, but I was certain of one thing. That woman, who initially seemed like a stranger, could be an unexpected ally. The plan wasn't just about exposing the economic and social truth of my daughter and her mother-in-law. It was bigger than that. I wanted to dismantle the facade of perfection they had built at the cost of my humiliation. I wanted everyone, absolutely everyone, to see what was hiding behind those applauses, those fake smiles, and those empty speeches. Once in front of the mirror, I dared to speak out loud, as if rehearsing the day of the revelation. "I don't want your affection," I said, imagining Naomi in front of me. "I don't need your applause. All I demand is respect, and if you don't know how to give it to me, I will take it from you with the truth." That mirror was my accomplice for weeks. I practiced words, gestures, even silences. I would not improvise. When the time came, every phrase had to be precise. Every pause had to sink her further into her own lie. And while everything cooked in the darkness, I smiled in public, accepted the snubs, and pretended not to hear the mockery. Inside, however, I repeated over and over, "Wait, Isabel, wait. Your moment will come." That moment was closer than anyone could imagine. There are conversations a mother never wants to have with her daughter. For years, I dreamed of sitting face to face, talking without yelling or reproaches, and maybe crying together to heal the wounds we carried. But when I finally gathered the courage to seek her out, I understood that the only thing I would find was a cruel mirror. My daughter reflecting, in her harshness and contempt, the worst of her father, and the woman she now called Mother. I asked her to meet me at my house, in the living room that had so often seen us share simple birthdays, afternoons of homework, and Sunday movies. She arrived late, as always, with an arrogant expression and expensive perfume clinging to every corner of the room. She didn't even apologize. She sat on the couch as if she were the owner, not a guest, and crossed her legs with an air I found unbearable. "What do you want now, Mom?" she asked, with that impatient tone that so often stabbed me like a needle in the chest. "I'm busy." I looked at her in silence for a few seconds. She had so much of me in her features that it hurt. The same dark hair, the same broad forehead, but in her eyes there was no tenderness or recognition, only coldness. "I wanted to talk to you," I finally said. "Not as enemies, but as mother and daughter." She laughed, a dry chuckle that tore me apart inside. "Mother and daughter? We stopped being that a long time ago." I bit my lip. I didn't want to cry, not in front of her. "Why, honey? Why do you hate me so much?" Her answer was a look filled with resentment. "Because you were never enough. Always small, always subdued, always begging for a place. Dad was right. You were a nuisance, and I didn't want to be like you." I felt the blow like a sledgehammer to the stomach. Hearing the same words her father had thrown at me so many times coming from her mouth was unbearable. It was like reliving all the years of humiliation, amplified by the voice of my own blood. "Everything I did was for you," I whispered, barely audible. "I gave up my dreams, my life, so you could have what I didn't." "And what good was it?" she interrupted. "You never gave me what I needed. Self-respect, pride. I found that with my other mother. She taught me to be strong, to not depend on anyone, to have presence. You, on the other hand, were always everyone's shadow." Her words made me tremble, but they also ignited me. "Presence?" I said, raising my voice. "You call trampling your mother presence, erasing your history. That woman wasn't with you during nights of fever. She didn't walk with you to school in the rain. She didn't sell her belongings to buy you your textbooks. That woman only appeared once you were already made, when it was easy to hang on to your pride." She looked away, uncomfortable for the first time, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "What's done is done. You chose to be invisible. Don't blame me for finding another figure who represents me better." I froze. It was the confirmation that I had lost her, that no word, no memory, and no sacrifice could undo the wall she had built between us. However, something changed in me at that instant. I no longer felt sadness. I felt fury, a cold, calculated fury that didn't lead to shouting or pleading, but to the certainty that I had to move forward with my plan. She had made her decision to deny me. I would make mine, to prove to her that not everything in life can be erased or replaced. "All right," I said, standing up. "If that's what you think, then there's nothing more to say." She smiled with that triumphant smirk I knew too well. "Finally, you understand." But she understood nothing, because while she thought she had defeated me, I already held the pieces that would collapse the castle of arrogance she had built with her mother-in-law. I walked her to the door. Before leaving, she turned and delivered one last blow. "When I talk about my mother, I don't think of you. Get used to it." I closed the door softly, my heart ablaze. I leaned against the wood and let out a deep sigh. I didn't cry, not anymore, because instead of tears, what coursed through me was a new energy, an absolute certainty. She had given me the final reason not to stop. In that moment, I understood that my daughter had become the mirror of everything I hated: her father's arrogance, her mother-in-law's manipulation, the coldness of misunderstood power, and I would no longer try to save her from herself. My mission was now different: to rip that mirror away and show it to her in front of everyone, even if it was the last thing I ever did. Because if she wanted to see me as a shadow, she would learn that shadows also know how to envelop everything, until they choke out the light that believes itself eternal. Just when I thought everything would remain confined to that private confrontation with my daughter, the unexpected voice of my daughter-in-law, Lena, reappeared. She, who had ignited the first spark at that birthday party, returned with even greater force. And this time, she didn't just speak for me. She spoke out against the entire facade that Naomi and Charlotte had constructed over the years. It happened at a family reunion, one of those events that seemed designed to display a perfect portrait. It was Naomi and Elias's wedding anniversary, and the event hall was decorated with a luxury that bordered on ostentation. Guests, imported flowers, cameras capturing every gesture. I had decided to attend, not out of affection, but because I knew these occasions were the ideal stage for masks to crack, and I wasn't wrong. Naomi's mother-in-law, Charlotte, dressed in an elegant designer suit with a practiced smile, strutted around like a queen among the attendees. Naomi followed her like a satellite, celebrating every word, every gesture, as if Charlotte were the only sun illuminating her life. I sat in a corner, invisible as usual, but with my eyes wide open. I waited. It was then that Lena, dressed simply, but with the dignity of someone who needs no adornments, stood up from her table. Her clear voice called for silence. No one understood what was about to happen, but everyone obeyed. "There are things that must be said," she began, "because one cannot live eternally behind appearances." The murmur of discomfort ran through the room. Charlotte arched her eyebrows, surprised. Naomi paled, perhaps recalling the scene from her birthday. I, however, leaned forward, my heart pounding hard. I knew something big was about to erupt. "You," Lena continued, looking directly at Charlotte, "have played the role of the perfect mother, the unimpeachable woman, the figure everyone must admire, for years. But I know what you're hiding. I know about the accounts you moved in silence, the shady business you dragged your son, Elias, and consequently my husband Joshua into. And I also know how you manipulated my sister-in-law Naomi, making her believe you were the only mother she deserved." An icy silence invaded the ballroom. I saw Charlotte's smile shatter, her face tightening with contained fury. Naomi, desperate, tried to interrupt her. "Stop it now! What are you trying to do with this? It's ridiculous!" But Lena didn't stop. "What I'm trying to do is tell the truth. Or do you want me to show the documents I'm holding? Because I have them. I've seen transfers, contracts with false names, agreements signed behind the family's back." The guests began to whisper. Some discreetly pulled out their cell phones. Others exchanged astonished glances. The perfect scene crumbled like a house of cards under an unexpected breath. I watched everything with a mixture of vertigo and satisfaction. I hadn't lifted a finger, but my daughter-in-law was fighting the battle I had planned in silence. It was as if fate had placed an ally I never sought on my path, someone who had also suffered under that family's manipulations and was no longer willing to keep quiet. Charlotte finally stood up. Her voice, charged with anger, resonated in the hall. "This is slander, a lie invented to destroy me." But her hands were shaking. That tremor was the clearest confession. She was afraid. Naomi ran toward her, embracing her in front of everyone, as if that gesture could protect her. "Don't listen to her," she cried. "It's just envy, a trap." However, her words no longer carried the same weight. No one listened to her with credibility. The shadow of doubt had fallen over their impeccable stage, and in these environments a shadow is enough to extinguish all the lights. I, sitting silently, let everything happen. I didn't need to intervene. It was like watching a chessboard where, without moving my pieces, I saw the enemy's pieces fall one by one. When she finished, Lena put down the microphone and walked out of the ballroom. She didn't seek my gaze. She didn't wait for applause or support. She simply left with the serenity of someone who has satisfied her conscience. When the door closed behind her, chaos erupted. Guests murmured, others left with quick excuses, and reporters improvised headlines in their heads. Charlotte tried to compose herself, but it was too late. Her image of perfection had been tainted, and Naomi, with her eyes glassy with rage, looked at me as if all of this were my fault. In her gaze, I read hatred, a hatred so deep it chilled my blood. But I also saw something else, fear. Because even if she wouldn't admit it, she knew Lena's words had substance. And what she ignored was that I too was keeping documents, evidence, secrets that could finish sinking her. That night, returning home, I thought about Lena's courage. She had taken a step I still hadn't dared to take. I wondered if she had done it only for personal revenge, or if, in some way, she had also done it for me. It didn't matter. The truth is that her voice had opened a door that no one could close now. The family war had stopped being a private whisper. Now it was exposed, bleeding in front of everyone. And I, who had lived for years under the weight of silence, understood that my moment was near, because when the truth starts to come out, There's no stopping it. All my life, I had dreaded public stages. I was always the woman who stayed on the sidelines, who avoided being the center of attention, who preferred to support others from the shadows instead of claiming her own space. But that night, walking into the hall, which was packed with business partners, friends, and relatives, I knew I couldn't hide any longer. The murmuring was deafening, a mix of curiosity and anxiety. Since Lena's confession weeks earlier, nothing had been the same. Everyone was waiting for explanations. Everyone wanted to see how the drama that no one could ignore would end. And amidst those expectant gazes, I found myself on a stage with a folder tucked under my arm that weighed more than any memory. That folder contained not just papers but decades of silences, humiliations, and wounds that were now being transformed into my only language of justice. I took a deep breath and surveyed the scene. I saw Naomi rigid in her seat, her eyes cold as knives and her body tense like a bow about to snap. Beside her, Charlotte stood up with a stony face, trying to project dignity, though I noticed a slight tremor in her hands. Both faces reminded me of years of contempt, the gestures of superiority, the looks that reduced me to a shadow, the words that condemned me to oblivion. And there they were, exposed before an audience that was beginning to suspect that this family perfection was nothing more than a facade. I opened the folder, and the sound of the paper crunching was like a gunshot that sliced through the silence. "I have been silent for too long," I said, my voice firm, though my insides were shaking. I kept quiet when my husband humiliated me, when my daughter pushed me away, when this family reduced me to nothing. I was silent out of love, out of fear, and out of habit, but no more. Today, I have come to speak, and what I am about to say will forever change the way you see those who have scorned me. The tension could be cut with a knife. Some heads leaned forward expectantly, others discreetly retreated, fearing the scandal that was coming. Calmly, I unfolded the documents. These were not rumors. They were not insinuations. They were contracts, transfers, bank records. My husband's inheritance and the economic dealings of Naomi's in-laws were tainted with irregularities. I had discovered it among dusty papers that no one expected me to review. But there it was. The truth they had hidden for years now turned into my sword. Naomi suddenly stood up, her voice loaded with fury. "Lies! This is all lies!" I looked at her without blinking and held up one of the documents. "Lies? Then explain to them why your signature appears here, authorizing movements you never declared. Explain to them, not me, why you agreed to cover for your father when he asked you to sign in his place." The color drained from her face. Her entire body shuddered. For an instant, her lips moved, but no words came out. The audience understood. The doubt had been sown, and doubt, once established, is more destructive than any scream. Charlotte stood up, haughty, her voice full of disdain. "This is a setup," she said, "a personal vendetta by a resentful woman." Then I pointed to her with the calm of someone who knows they have already won. "If it were a setup, why are your hands trembling?" The murmuring erupted among the attendees. Some gasped in surprise, others exchanged incredulous glances. That woman's perfect image crumbled in a matter of seconds. It no longer mattered what she said. The tremor in her hands spoke louder than her voice. I took a few seconds of silence, just enough for the tension to become unbearable. Then I added, "I am not looking for pity or free revenge. All I want is for the truth to come to light. And here it is, in these papers that notaries will validate, in these documents that cannot be erased or ignored. They tried to erase me, but memory cannot be erased. And today, that memory exposes them in front of everyone." The notaries present confirmed the authenticity of the documents. The business partners, indignant, began to murmur among themselves. Some even hurried out of the room. Those who remained looked at Naomi with a mix of contempt and disappointment. She collapsed into her chair, her eyes overflowing with tears that were not of repentance, but of rage. Charlotte, in contrast, tried to keep her head held high, but fear gleamed in her eyes. She knew the mask had fallen. I closed the folder and placed it on the table with a dry thud, as if to say, "Everything has been said." I didn't need to yell. My quiet, measured voice was more devastating than their screams of desperation. I walked toward the exit, while the room stirred with whispers, accusing looks, and the echo of a truth that no one could stop now. Before leaving, I turned one last time. I looked at my daughter, huddled in her seat, her face buried in her hands. My voice was clear, firm, definitive. I didn't leave, and I will never leave. I am your mother, even if you deny me, even if you hate me, and my voice will always haunt you. And then I walked through the door. Outside, the night was cold, but a flame burned in my chest that would never be extinguished. It wasn't joy I felt, nor peace. It was justice. A justice that had taken years to arrive, but finally rose with the force of thunder. The night after the public confrontation was the first in many years that I slept without waking up in fear. I didn't dream of yelling, nor contempt, nor scenes where my daughter turned her back on me. I didn't dream at all, and that emptiness was more restorative than any illusion. Upon waking, however, I understood that one more step remained. I had unmasked my daughter and her mother-in-law. I had restored the truth to the place from which they had snatched it. But I still had to decide what to do with what was left: my inheritance, my name, my legacy. For decades, I believed that the assets were something distant from me, that everything belonged to my husband, and that I was only the invisible guardian who kept them in order. But in my hands now were the deeds, the accounts, the contracts that proved that a large part of that fortune, directly or indirectly, belonged to me. Yet what I valued most was not the money. It was the opportunity to decide. That power of decision, which had been denied to me all my life, was finally mine. I didn't want to repeat history. I didn't want to perpetuate the chain of arrogance and contempt that had destroyed my family. If my daughter had denied me as a mother, I would deny her as an heiress. I met with my attorney, Mr. Bell, at his office. He placed a draft of a will we had worked on in secret weeks before on the table. I read it slowly, savoring every word. It clearly established that Naomi was excluded from the inheritance, that she would not receive a single cent or a single property. Everything would be designated to a fund for young adults aging out of foster care and women who are survivors of domestic violence. A smaller but significant portion would be left to my daughter-in-law, Lena, the only one who had the courage to raise her voice when everyone else was silent. Mr. Bell looked at me cautiously, as if afraid I would regret it. "Are you completely sure?" he asked. I nodded firmly, surer than I had been about anything else in my life. My grandchildren will have to forge their own path without relying on a family name, and my daughter will learn, even if it's too late, that not everything in this life can be bought with arrogance. I signed the document with a calm that surprised me. It was like closing a circle that had been open for decades, as if with that signature I buried forever the shadow of my husband and the wound my daughter had left me. For the first time, I felt that I was not the one obeying, but the one deciding. The following days were a whirlwind of rumors. The news soon leaked. The widow had disinherited her only daughter. Local newspapers published it, some with scandalous headlines, others with an almost poetic tone. The society that had so applauded Naomi's union with her perfect mother-in-law now reveled in the fall of her mask. And amidst all that commotion, I remained calm, watching from my window as the storm raged outside. The reaction didn't take long to arrive. One afternoon, Naomi burst into my house without announcing herself. She was distraught, her eyes red from crying or yelling, I don't know which. She confronted me in the living room with the fury of someone who feels everything she had is slipping through her fingers. "How could you do this to me?" she yelled. "I'm your daughter, your only daughter." I looked at her calmly. "Naomi, do you remember that night when you told everyone you could go? That day, you were the one who renounced me." Her lips trembled. She tried to reply but found no words. I continued speaking, this time without trembling, without fear. "You had me your whole life, and you despised me. Now you will have to learn what it means to live without me, without my support, without my inheritance. Maybe then you will understand the value of what you lost." She stood there for a few seconds, as if waiting for me to break down, to regret it, to run and hug her. But I didn't. I stood tall, my head held high, showing her that the invisible woman no longer existed. Finally, she slammed the door as she left, and her fury was trapped within the walls while I remained at peace. Over time, my decision began to bear fruit. The foundation I created opened its doors. Young people who had never had a home found shelter. Women who had been silenced regained their voice. And seeing their illuminated faces, I understood that this was the true legacy I wanted to leave. Not riches tainted by deceit, not the empty titles of a broken family, but something that truly transformed lives. Sometimes at night, I think about my daughter. I wonder if she will ever understand that what I did was not out of hatred, but out of justice. Maybe she will understand one day, maybe never. It doesn't matter anymore. My life can no longer revolve around her contempt. Now it revolves around something bigger, my recovered dignity. I look in the mirror and no longer see the broken woman begging for love. I see someone who survived humiliation, who walked through the shadows and knew how to wait for the moment to rise up. And though I know that loneliness will continue to accompany me, it doesn't frighten me. I prefer dignified solitude to poisoned company. That is my true triumph. That when they speak of me, they don't remember me as the forgotten mother, but as the woman who refused to be erased, who transformed pain into justice, and who, even wounded, knew how to get back up. That is my legacy. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.